Teddy and I had been working at Disney for years. The two of us had seen hundreds, if not thousands, of young cast members come and go, heading off to college or to better jobs and brighter futures. Meanwhile, the two of us stuck around and became a running joke to some of the younger employees, since we were never promoted to management, that is. Most of the lower-level members were young, in their early 20s or late teens, and to them, it was just a part-time gig, a way to raise money for college or to pass a bit of time until their real lives and careers began. But Teddy and I were lifers, and some would say losers. Although I would never attach that label to myself willingly, I'd heard it whispered enough times to know that it was what other people thought of us. We'd both been there for nearly 2 decades, and had worked on pretty much every single attraction, but had never been deemed responsible enough to be promoted to supervisor status. Over all that time, I found a lot of secrets about the place. Some things that are known to the public, but also some revelations that aren't talked about anywhere. Did you know that cast members who work as mascots have to wear communal underwear? Yeah, that's right. They all share the same underoos, and they get washed in between uses. At least, in theory. Who knows what pervert came up with that idea? Or how about the fact the skeleton on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride was originally constructed out of real bones? Despite the park's insistence that all the bones were removed, a few still remain. Management lost track of which were real and which were fake, and they just left the real ones in there along with the imposters. But when you're up close, it's easy to tell them apart. The real ones are a little more yellow, and they're heavier than the plaster ones. There are plenty of morbid secrets like that. People scatter the ashes of their deceased loved ones in the park so frequently, we actually have a not-so-subtle code name for it. A white powder alert. The Haunted Mansion and the Pirates of the Caribbean are the most common places, but it's done all over, and who knows how often people get away with it without even being noticed. Code 101 means a ride is temporarily shut down, while Code V, or a protein spill, means that someone has vomited on a ride and it needs to be cleaned up. Those spills are often the cause of ride shutdowns, rather than mechanical issues. Oh, and if you hear yourself or someone else being referred to as a treasured guest, it doesn't mean you're a VIP. It's actually our code word for saying you're being an asshole. There are stories of ghosts, some told by people who never believed in such things before witnessing them in the park. The specter of Walt Disney himself has been seen a couple of times, outside Sleeping Beauty's castle just on the other side of the drawbridge. Or sometimes he's seen at night just outside his old apartment on Main Street, where occasionally you might smell a whiff of cigarette smoke, despite the fact that such things are banned inside the park. Walt and his family once lived there, so they could spy on visitors and listen to their opinion on the park. They would eavesdrop on their conversations from the second-floor apartment, just above the street level. George, a dead electrician, supposedly haunts the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and every morning, cast members must call out, "Good morning, George," at the start of the day. Otherwise, the ride will mysteriously have issues all day long. Unexpected shutdowns and other strange things often occur if George isn't given his proper morning greeting. And have you heard about the animatronics in It's a Small World running all night long? Yep, those rumors are true too. In fact, quite a few of the lifelike robots stay in motion 24/7, even throughout the lockdown and park shutdowns a couple of years back. If you ask the management about it, they'll tell you it's because the attractions are cheaper to maintain that way. They break down less frequently if they're in constant motion. That's the excuse we get anyway. But I've come to realize there might be far more terrifying reasons for this. Something so disturbing and twisted that I wouldn't have thought it was possible if I hadn't witnessed it for myself. Teddy and I were on our lunch break when we found the storage room. We were looking for somewhere a little more private since Teddy had brought a bit of homemade greenery and his favorite piece of glassware that day. The park has miles and miles of tunnels crisscrossing beneath it, and Teddy and I had explored most of the labyrinth over our years of service. Like everything else in the park, there was a stupid nickname for these underground tunnels. They had been dubbed utilidors by some management types in the distant past. Most of the cast members just called them the tunnels, and they were so vast we often used golf carts to get from one end of them to the other. There were odd dead ends at some of the tunnels that seemed to intentionally lead to nowhere. We were currently in one such useless utilidor when we noticed an odd-looking door which appeared to be at least half a century old, if not more. It had a rusted placard hanging over its surface which read, "Obsolete animatronic storage." "Hey, didn't there used to be a vending machine there?" Teddy asked. "Who cares? Let's see if it opens. We've only got 20 minutes left," I said, looking at the time on my cell phone. The doorknob turned in my hand, and the two of us went inside. I looked for a light switch on the wall to my right, but I didn't find one. It was pitch black and impossible to see anything. Using the flashlight on my phone, I cast a beam of light around the room, trying to see what kind of space we were in. There were people-shaped forms all around us, draped in tarps and tablecloths. The room was as long as a football field, but it was narrow, only about 15 feet across. "Creepy," Teddy said, taking the words right out of my mouth. Well, I guess it did say this was animatronic storage. This must be really old. He wandered away from the door, and it clicked shut behind him. Something about that made me nervous, but I had ignored the feeling. The door had been unlocked, and that meant we'd be able to get out again. Still, I reached for the knob to check it. My hand was about to touch the polished brass when Teddy called out, making me jump. "Whoa! Check this out!" he said, sounding excited. I left the door, turning around to see what he was looking at. He had his cell phone light on as well, and was lifting up one of the tarps to look at what was underneath. "Man, this thing's freaky looking." He pulled the tarp away, and I saw what he meant. The thing hidden beneath was very creepy. It had the goateed face of a young man, but the ears and nubby horns of a goat, looking far too real. Its lower half looked like it also belonged to a goat. The thing reminded me of a satyr, those drunken, lustful half-goat gods from Greek mythology. I tried to figure out why it was making me feel so uneasy, and realized it was the eyes. They were too lifelike, far more real than the animatronics out in the park, and the look of the skin, the way it reflected the light and anything about it, it looked like it was a real creature. More likely, a man had been sewn to the body of a goat in a very thorough way, making the seams blend together perfectly. Teddy was already moving on to the next one, looking under another tarp. He left me alone with this one, and I looked back down at it as I let go of the cover and let it fall across its face again. Flinching backwards, I nearly screamed, as I could have sworn the eyes of the thing were looking at me, just as I dropped the tarp over its face. My heart was beating fast, and I tried to tell myself it was just a trick of the light, or that the eyes had been looking up that way the whole time, and I just hadn't noticed. "We need to go," I heard myself say, but Teddy wasn't listening. "Holy crap, this one's even more jacked up. Dude, you gotta check this out." I opened my mouth to say, "No, let's get out of here," but my words caught in my throat. The satyr creature under the tarp was clearly moving now. Its head was still draped in the plastic sheet, but I could see it turning to look at me, as if its gaze could penetrate through the tarp. "Dude, come check this out," Teddy was yelling, pulling the next sheet off and dropping it to the floor. I saw what he was referring to, my eyes drawn to it despite the terror of the draped creature just in front of me. This one was tall, standing nearly 10 feet. It had one large eye instead of two. Man, whoever made these things was tripping on acid or something. Look at this thing. It looks like they jacked an eye from an elephant and stuffed it in some dude's forehead. I think they were trying to make a cyclops. I could barely hear him, as now the thing in front of me wasn't the only figure in the room which was moving. To my left, The entire row of covered forms were beginning to stretch and turn as they woke up from whatever sleep they had been in. Some were tall, some were short, like the satyr thing on my right, but all of them were alive. I realized it was very cold all of a sudden, and realized I could see my breath steaming out in the air. A compressor groaned to life, and I saw a nearby vent cough out a frosty plume as if something had been jammed or broken and was suddenly operating again. The temperature in the room began to plummet, and a second later, I was freezing cold, the rushing air chilling the back of my neck. Finally, I was shocked out of my stupor and managed to get a word out. "Teddy," I croaked, but too late. The giant Cyclops hand shot out and grabbed my friend by the throat. It lifted him up into the air while his legs kicked and his arms thrashed, trying to break its grip. He was choking and sputtering, flailing madly as he tried to free himself. The Cyclops firmly held him by the throat, and I heard the sound of cartilage and bones being crushed. His spine popped, and his head bent back at an impossible angle, his skull lolling backwards like a broken Pez dispenser. And then the giant dropped him to the concrete floor of the room, and his phone clattered and turned over, casting half the room in darkness again. I backed away, feeling like I was moving in slow motion, but unable to go any quicker. Reaching back for the doorknob, it felt like the tunnel had grown by 100 feet. It was further away than it could possibly have ever been. I kept backing up, taking slow, quiet steps. The figures were moving towards me, all of them closing the gap and slowly walking in my direction. Their forms were covered, draped in bed sheets and tarps and tablecloths, as if this place had been thrown together in a hurry, hastily constructed to house these possessed animatronics or whatever these creatures were. Cold air was filling the room, making it even more difficult to move. My skin felt like it was being stabbed with pins and needles, the freezing wind going right through my summer clothes. There was a sound of tearing flesh and blood being spilled. I looked to see several of the monsters were tearing the skin from Teddy's face, peeling it from his bones with some difficulty, like trying to open an underripe orange. The worst part was, it looked like he was still alive. He was opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water, his eyes wide open as if he'd be screaming if he were capable of it. I tried to tear my eyes away from it, but I couldn't. I found myself staring at him as they took the flesh off his face. I backed up hard into something and realized it was the door. In the darkness, I felt for the doorknob behind me, but I couldn't find it. The creatures were still moving towards me, all of their faces covered by sheets except for the massive Cyclops that had killed my friend. Its one huge eye was fixed on me, and as it moved in lockstep with the other creatures, they all seemed to share one hive mind. As they approached, a few stepped on each other's coverings, tearing them away and revealing their hideous faces. I saw a woman's upper body sewn onto the legs of a deer, and a man with the hindquarters of a bull, their faces full of mute anger. My hand groped for the doorknob desperately, and after several long moments, it settled on the smooth brass. It was so cold, almost frozen. I spun around, expecting the doorknob to turn easily, but this time it was stuck. I couldn't tell if it was locked or frozen solid, but either way it wouldn't budge. Feeling like there would be icy hands around my throat at any second, I was too terrified to turn around. I heard the sound of shuffling feet moving closer, the icy wind blowing through my clothes and raising goosebumps on my skin. I began pounding against the door with my fists, banging on it as hard as I could as I screamed for help, pleading for someone to save me. "Help! Help! Open the door!" I yelled at the top of my lungs. The corridor we had entered was a dead end, rarely used by anyone. Of course, this door would be locked from the inside, I thought to myself. Who would offer an escape to these animatronic demons? If they had ever been imbued with any form of failsafe, it was long ago out of commission and useless. These creatures had no mercy and no respect for human life. They wanted blood and flesh and meat to create more of themselves, to raise an army of undead robotic soldiers. Manic thoughts were racing through my head as I tried to think of another way out. There had to be something, some other way out. I turned around, hoping for some other exit to present itself, but instead I just saw hundreds of shrouded forms stepping closer and closer until they were just a few feet away. A gurgling, wheezing sound could be heard from behind them, and I realized it was the labored breathing of Teddy slowly dying. If I didn't get out of here, I'd be next. With one desperate move, I kicked out towards the head of the nearest shrouded figure. It was the satyr. My foot connected with his face, and as it did, the entire crowd fell back a step, as if hurting one of them would hurt all of them. I lashed out with another blow, punching it in the gut, and the crowd took another wounded step backward. I used the newfound space to my advantage and took a short running start towards the door. Kicking it hard with my boot, I connected squarely with the spot behind the doorknob. It rattled in the frame, but it didn't budge. Taking a quick look back over my shoulder, I saw the crowd of animatronic creatures were coming at me again with renewed anger. They looked furious at me for assaulting one of them, and apparently I had injured it. The satyr was slumped forward, its joints making creaky noises as it made its way towards me, its movements jerky and disorganized. I kicked the door again, harder this time, using every ounce of force I could muster. I heard something splinter and break, but it still wouldn't budge. Icy hands grabbed my throat from behind, and I threw an elbow backward to try to break free. It connected with whatever had grabbed me, and it didn't let go. Instead, its grip tightened, choking and squeezing my throat until I couldn't breathe. I let out another strangled cry for help, but no sound came out this time. The grip on my windpipe was making it impossible to call out. My feet were going numb from the cold, which seemed to have intensified even more somehow. I hadn't thought it was possible to feel any colder, but I realized that whoever was controlling the temperature of this place was doing this on purpose. These things didn't like the cold, and it put them in a state of hibernation. For some reason, this place had been almost room temperature when we entered, bringing these creatures back to life. With one more desperate effort, I lifted my leg and kicked as hard as I could, my heel connecting with the door just beside the latch. Something shattered and broke loudly, and the door swung open on its hinges. The momentum brought me forward, and I found myself tumbling back into the corridor. Whatever had grabbed hold of me came with me, the icy hand still around my neck. As I landed, the thing's fingers broke off like icicles, shattering on impact. The shrouded creature was writhing on the floor, looking as if it wanted to get up and chase me, but wasn't quite capable of it yet. It was still too cold. I stumbled to my feet and ran from there, not really thinking about my mistake until I was far past that point. When it occurred to me what I had done, it was too late. I had let those things out. I'd opened the door and freed them, and I had allowed the warm air inside so they could come back to life and escape. I was too terrified to stay in the park. I went home immediately without saying a word to anyone, then called my boss and told him I was sick with a stomach flu. I apologized, saying I'd been throwing up in the bathroom and didn't want to cause a code V while on stage. He told me that was okay, since he knew I was a dedicated employee, trusted cast member who had been with the park for years. But he did ask if I'd seen Teddy, and I had to lie and tell him I hadn't. I'm supposed to go back to work tomorrow, for the first time since all of this happened. The worst part about it, nobody has reported Teddy missing. His family hadn't called to say anything either. It's almost like none of it ever happened, except I've got the marks around my neck, the bruises that prove I didn't imagine it. I just got a strange message from Teddy on his cell phone. He says, "See you at work tomorrow, buddy," accompanied by a mouse emoji. Me and some of the cast members have a big surprise for you. Have you ever stared at something so long that somehow time seems to fade into obscurity. What feels like mere seconds, in reality has been minutes. Well, me neither. That was until I first saw the void. I can't explain what it's like or how it feels, but it's something that can only be sensed, like when staring at the corner of your room in the dark. You can sense something is there, but you can't see it. You just know. That's how the void makes you feel. The hairs on the back of your neck stand up, while your eyes just gravitate towards it, unwillingly. It all started when my girlfriend got her first apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small one-bedroom in the middle of the city. She was excited, and I wanted to be supportive. So I did my best to show my adulation on her starting this new chapter of her life. I was on a break for the semester and was coming back home. Me and my girlfriend had done our best to make a long-distance relationship work, and both me and her were beyond elated to see each other. But, more importantly, she was eager for me to see her apartment. As soon as I got home, I told my parents hi, ate a delicious lunch my mom prepared for me, something I was craving all semester, and headed to my girlfriend's. Arriving at the complex, I was taken a bit back. The place was guarded with security that was armed. They swarmed around the perimeter, guarding the entrance. As I approached closer, I could see the armed guard begin to look me up and down, and before I was able to get a word out, he interjected. "Sir, no soliciting. You must leave the premises," the oversized man told me. The demeanor of the guard left me a bit bewildered, thinking perhaps I had the wrong place. I pulled out my phone to double-check the address, and to add to my confusion, it was indeed the right place. "Sir, please leave the premise," the giant man once again said. Still confused, I did my best to mutter out a coherent sentence, feeling intimidated by the man brandishing the rifle. My girlfriend lives here. Kimberly. I'm here to visit her. She lives in 4B, I told the stoic man, my voice shaken with apprehension. The guard remained silent and unmoving, all while staring at me intently, and several seconds passed by before he spoke. He radioed to whomever was on the other side of the receiver. "You're good. Please enter," the man told me, while now brandishing a bit of a smile, or perhaps a smirk. I gave him a little smile and walked past the guard as I entered the building. Something about the entrance, other than the usual circumstances, felt off. I could hear the most abnormal humming penetrating from the walls. I ignored it and walked towards the elevator, still jovial at the revelation of seeing my girlfriend. Approaching her door, I could still hear the humming engulfing me, as if a giant motor was filtering air. I knocked on the door and stood with anticipation. As Kimberly opened, all the worries that had inundated my mind evaporated into a cloud of emptiness, and all my attentions were set on the most beautiful woman in the world, my girlfriend. "Hey," Kimberly shouted, while jumping into my arms. I didn't even have a chance to respond. My voice was silenced as she showered me in an endless sea of kisses. She quickly pulled me into the apartment, continuing to chatter on about how she had been and how life was coming into place for her, but mostly she was talking about the apartment. As she walked me around for the grand tour, which only took about a minute, her rant continued on without a pause, and as my mind gradually began to drift a bit, my eyes locked onto her balcony. "You got a balcony?" I asked, with a bit of enchantment. "Oh yeah, I forgot to show you. Come have a look," she said, grabbing my hand and pulling me outside. I was a bit disappointed. I was thinking perhaps she had a scenery of the skyline. Instead, it was a direct view into the courtyard, a view she shared with all her other neighbors. I looked around at what seemed to be an endless sea of balconies. Staring at all the apartments above and below me was making me a little dizzy. "Whoa, I didn't realize the complex was so big. How many floors are there?" I asked, astonished. Kimberly just shrugged her shoulders, dismissing my question, and started pointing to her neighbors, gossiping about who she suspected to be a weirdo. My eyes followed her fingers, seeing that most of the balconies were vacant of anyone, but we only saw one person. It was a woman, just standing still and unmoving like some statue. She was leering down at the courtyard. That caught my attention since she was positioned in such an odd way. I looked down to see if I could make out what she was seeing, but to my dismay there was nothing. "What's she staring at?" I asked rhetorically. Kimberly abruptly stopped talking and realized who I was referring to. "Huh, I don't know," she told me, practically dangling over the top of the guardrail as she tried to figure out what the lady was gawking at. "Damn it, Kimberly, be careful," I said with frustration, pulling her back over. She stared at me curiously. "This whole place is a bit weird, isn't it? I mean, what's up with all the security guards outside?" I could see Kimberly's charming eyes drop with disappointment due to my criticism, her arms grasping at her waist with frustration. "So you don't like my place? Thanks. Those guards are here because some politician's kid lives here, or something like that. Honestly, it makes me feel safe," she told me, as she turned to walk back inside. I felt a knot turning in my guts, knowing that I'd hurt her feelings, so I approached her as she was still turning away from me and embraced her, kissing her neck. "I'm sorry. It's a great place. I guess it's just weird being back. I don't know," I said as I caressed her tenderly. She turned and looked at me with those enchanting emerald eyes. I could feel my heart skip a beat when she smiled. As night progressed, I tried to brush off the weird encounter with the balcony and just enjoyed myself with the love of my life. As we watched movies, I stayed the night and found it difficult to sleep. I lay in bed staring up at the ceiling as my girlfriend breathed deeply in her slumber. It was that humming. I could still hear it. I got out of bed and walked into the living room, grabbing at my head, feeling an intense pounding permeating. The sound seemed to be coming from outside. I walked towards the balcony cautiously and slid the glass door open, the moonlight showing the complex in a vibrant blue tint. I stepped out onto the balcony, hoping that the fresh air would relieve some of my anxiety. Instead, I was presented with the most frightening sight. The lady from earlier was standing on the same place, staring down at the courtyard. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I asked, directing my words towards the woman. She remained still and unresponsive, the surrealness of the situation sending a chill down my spine. That's when my caution morphed into a bit of terror. Through my peripherals, I noticed that there were now more neighbors on the balcony, all standing in that same emotionless stance. I turned to get a closer look at the others and realized that they too were staring down at the courtyard. As I stared at them with disbelief, one man turned his gaze to me, catching me completely by surprise. His expression was riddled with pure terror, defeat engulfing his eyes as they glistened in the moonlight from tears. I could feel him whispering something to me from across the courtyard, and as my brain did its best to put the words together that he was mouthing, I soon realized he was asking for help. I stepped back into the apartment, horrified, my retreating away from the moonlight balcony. "Hey!" I practically jumped in the air like a scared cat, my girlfriend having startled me. "What are you doing? Why'd you get out of bed?" Kimberly asked. I remained quiet for a few seconds, trying to recover my breath as it had escaped me, my heart still beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. "Sorry, I couldn't sleep. That humming was bothering me on the balcony." "Again with the balcony. Just don't go out there if it bothers you so much. What humming are you talking about? The air conditioning?" Kimberly asked angrily. I understood that she must have felt I was criticizing her apartment, so I didn't respond. We just went back to bed. The next morning, I went back to my parents' house under the guise of wanting to spend some time with my family. Well, at least that's what I told Kimberly. In reality, I couldn't spend another minute in that horrid apartment. Just thinking about what had happened last night made my skin crawl, and I could feel a wave of relief wash over me knowing I was far away from that place, away from those people. Days passed, and it quickly turned into a week. My mother became curious as to why I was no longer spending time with my beloved girlfriend. "I don't get it. Summer's almost over, and soon you'll have to go back to school. Why don't you spend the last week with her? Or did you guys break up?" I didn't know how to respond. In all honesty, I hadn't even talked to Kimberly in weeks. In fact, she hadn't even texted me or called me for some reason that left me feeling a little bit left out. The feeling of being perturbed quickly morphed into one of concern once I had the revelation of perhaps her neighbors had gotten her. "Son, are you okay?" my mom once again asked, disrupting my deep thoughts. Yeah, sorry, Mom, I guess I was sort of thinking about how fast the summer had gone by, and you're right, I'm going to go see her today, actually. We had a big dinner planned, I lied. No need to get her involved with this apartment nonsense, I thought. I reached into my pocket to retrieve my phone and nervously searched for Kimberly's number. I dreaded calling her, knowing what place she lived in, almost as if the complex could sense my fear. There she was, a finger press away from knowing if she was okay or not, but I waited and waited, time clicking ever so slowly, as I could hear my mother's footsteps in the background, almost urging me to dial. Click. The phone didn't even ring, it just went straight to voicemail. Somehow, in the back of my mind, I knew what had happened. The place wanted me to go there. It wanted me to rescue Kimberly. As I stood still, lost in my own contemplations, I couldn't explain anything other than divine intervention took control of my limbs, and with haste I made my way out the door into my car. I was going to save the love of my life. Arriving at the apartment, I noticed the armed guards were no longer present. I didn't see any movement of life outside at all, in fact. The complex was desolated. I could hear that dreaded humming from outside, the sound that was getting louder. I almost regretted my decision to come back to this place, but I had to save Kimberly. I cautiously made my way up to her apartment, and to my dismay, the door was wide open. The apartment was absent of sound or any light, darkness protruding out into the corridor. "Kim, are you there?" I called out. I breathed in deeply, swallowing my trepidation as I walked into the apartment. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I wandered around, still calling out for Kimberly, and that's when I saw her. She was out on the balcony. She stood unmoved as her body cradled back and forth in one place, as her head was positioned down towards the courtyard. I quickly ran to her, grabbing her shoulders and turning her to face me, but her gaze was vacant. Her eyes glazed over. "Kim, answer me. What happened? Snap out of it," I demanded, as her tears began streaming down her face. She remained unresponsive, a bit of drool sliding down her chin. She was completely gone, and all I could do was embrace her, crying, wishing that she would come back. That's when I heard her voice. It was calling me to the courtyard. "Kim?" I whispered out, utterly confounded. I carefully looked over the balcony, my eyes crawling as it gazed down at the dark courtyard. All the neighbors were still in their same positions. That's when I finally saw it. It was something I'd never seen before, some sort of chasm that glowed. I don't know how I couldn't have seen it before. "I'm down here. It's beautiful. Come down here with me," Kimberly's voice told me. That humming, it was coming from that void, and now I couldn't look away, as I just kept staring into it. Kim's down there. I just want to be with her. I don't know how long I've been staring at it, but if you ever hear a humming, just know it's coming from the void, and whatever you do, don't stare into it. Little is known about my grandpa, which is strange, but it's not like he's ever been a person of interest. All that we knew was that he was in the Army. After that, he suffered from PTSD and died under mysterious conditions. The end. It was December 2017. Nathan and I were home decorating for Christmas. Mom was out on a shopping spree. We were jerking around when Des showed up, a longtime friend of mine. With the three of us in the house, something was bound to happen. Nathan decided to go call his girlfriend, Anne. They'd been going out a couple of days now. "Dude, who's this?" Des pointed to the urn that was situated under the tree. "That's Grandpa. You can touch him. I know you're into freaky stuff." But it was already too late. His hands were all over the thing. Des had already opened the urn. Looks like drugs. What do you think would happen if I snorted some of it? Think you'll get high or just dead? He took a handful out of the urn. I inched closer to try and take it away from him. "Dude, come on. I don't think you'd get high." "Probably not." He raised an eyebrow and smirked. I knew that look. We'd been friends for over a decade, and I could tell when he had a messed up idea. He was an idiot. Maybe so was I. That's when we got along. Plan was simple. Get Nathan to snort the grandpa ashes and get first-hand experience of what would happen. Chances are, nothing would happen. I got the camera ready while Dez planted some ash residue on the top lip and nostril to act like he'd already snorted some. With the ash residue on his nose, it was go time. Knowing my little brother, he'd be too innocent and too easy to fool. "What are you guys up to?" he asked, when he saw Dez wiping his nose and howling. "Whew! Now that you're done taking care of business, my boy, how about some of this?" Dez grabbed him by the neck, leading him to the table where lines of something were spread out. "I don't know, man. I don't think he can handle it," I said, looking at Nathan as I gaslighted him to get a reaction. See, the thing is, if he'd known me better, he would have seen right through me. I don't even let him smoke weed with us. Why would I let him have any of whatever this was? I saw him bite down. I can. Beating his chest, trying to boost his bravado, he lowered his head, taking a deep breath and snorting the whole line. Des and I both burst out laughing. Nathan was confused for a while. Then he went stiff, his body starting to convulse. He fell to the ground, rolling and blinking rapidly. "What's happening? What's going on?" Des shoved me to the side and tried to steady him. "Get some water," he told me. I came back with a glass of water and he downed it. "What the hell, bro?" He looked at me. "What? I was thirsty." Then he proceeded to slap Nathan. "Wake up! Wake up!" Nathan continued to jerk his body. Then he went limp. There was a deafening silence in the room. Beads of sweat dribbled down my face. I splashed him with water and he woke up. What'd you guys do?" he yelled at us. We told him what had happened. We couldn't keep a straight face. We laughed about it. Then Nathan started wearing more than one jacket. He claimed he was cold. We shrugged it off. He'd come and snuggle with Mom during movies. "Mom's warm," he said, and eventually fell asleep. It was weird. The dude was 17. Still, I was getting an uneasy feeling that I kept shutting off. At times, he'd complain about how his girl, Anne, was not giving him much warmth. I assumed he was talking about sex or something and getting his blood going. How little I knew. Nathan stopped going out, and Anne stopped calling. He had quieted down about being cold. Around midnight, I'd catch him in front of Mom's room, snuggling something like a blanket. Every time I'd knock on his door, he'd come rushing out. "Everything okay, bud? What's up with Anne? Y'all break up?" He'd just act like everything was okay. Then one day, while we were watching a movie, Des leaned over and told me, "Dude, I heard from Cass's boyfriend Diego, who went with Brian to the theater, about how Matt's cousin, his brother's a little slow, he heard Kelly say, 'Anne's missing.' I don't know, dude. It's kind of weird." That was news to me. Nathan told me that everything was fine and he had just spoken to Anne. I think he's lying. We need to check out his room. Des looked at me like I was high. He sized me up from head to toe. I mean, I was high, but he was making it a little obvious. I'm not about to go in your brother's room and check out his weird collection of who knows what." "Hey, what are you doing? Let go." Nathan had fallen asleep, snuggled up with our mom on the couch like he did sometimes, and I wasn't about to waste the opportunity. A strong stench wafted from Nathan's room as we approached. We had to cover our noses. "That's nasty, man. Does he crap the bed or something?" Ugh. I turned around, looking for something out of place. Des had pulled his blanket and found the source of the smell. There was what appeared to be skin neatly laid there. Parts of it were jagged. It was signs that whoever had skinned the person was an amateur. "What are you guys doing?" We both spun around and found Nathan standing there, eyes hollow and devoid of emotions or recognition. He tilted his head to the side. "Oh, I see you found Anne's blanket. She was saying I was getting under her skin, so I got under her skin all right. See, Tate, I've been feeling chilly for a while now, but Mom's home, and Anne's skin helps me sleep better at night. There's 2 more fabrics to that skin blanket, though." He took a few strides towards us, snuggling the thing, bloodshot eyes watching us. You killed Anne and took her skin? What, are you sick?" The whole scene made my head hurt, realization dawning on me. He was possessed. He had to be. "You messed up, man. Like, really messed up." Des pulled the skin by the corner. There were bloodstains and bruises. The thing was flappy. He scrunched his nose. "He's capable of that. What else is he capable of? He killed Anne and skinned her. That's just sick, man." Nathan giggled. "Nuh-uh. Anne's alive. I love her. So I didn't kill her. She killed herself to keep me warm. After the whole ordeal with the powder, I was feeling cold, you know?" My heart sank, blame crashing into me. "We did this. We did. We need to fix it. We need to fix you." I moved closer, each step heavier than the last, heart hammering in my chest. My breath was strained, and I went in for a hug. "We?" Des asked, while trying to get the cogs in his head working. "What you mean, we?" "Nuh-uh, brah." I watched Nathan get in bed and pull Anne's skin over his body as he let out a deep sigh. "Close the door on your way out," he said, pulling it tightly around his body, almost snuggling it. He was smiling. "Look, you might be wondering why we were so calm about all this. Some of it was the weed, but some of it was us realizing we couldn't tell anybody, because we had done this. Dez's place was the best place to think without Nathan eavesdropping. We didn't want to make him suspect us. When our heads were cleared, we yelled and kicked things and cussed at our stupidity. So your grandpa possessed your brother, and now he's doing his bidding. Your brother's a crybaby. This can't be him." Des was going up and down, biting his nails. And dead people are cold, meaning that's why he's feeling cold, and he only finds warmth in those he loves, like your mom. I fumbled for my phone and dialed her number. It went to voicemail. I tried it, and it went straight to voicemail again. Des told me to put my phone on record because he had a weird feeling. We needed to do something, but without a solid plan, things could get out of hand. That's how we did things, though. Act now and think later. Des was quick to Google some exorcist stuff and phrases. We got holy water, salt, and crosses, and we ran like hell back to my place. The lights were off, which was strange. We tried our best to sneak in and turn the lights on. Nathan was sitting on the couch, his skin blanket wrapped around him. The whole room reeked of decay, but he seemed to be asleep. Slowly as possible, we made our way towards him. Just as we came to within arm's reach, he woke up. His eyes were blood red, and he went feral. He jumped up, gnashing his teeth and fingernails in my face. He was clawing with that thing dangling off his shoulder like a cape. Des yanked him by the skin blanket, trying to get him off of me. Oh my God, it's so slippery. It stinks." Nathan turned around and headbutted him, and he fell with his nose bleeding. I splashed him with the holy water, and he shrieked, retreating to the corner. His voice went deep. "Son, don't. It's Grandpa Max. I'm so cold." I splashed him some more, and he whimpered, demurring as his demeanor changed. "Tate, what's happening? What are you doing?" It was my brother's voice, his eyes pleading. "Please, help me. I'm so cold." Everything around me became muffled. I looked at what I was doing, then back to the person before me. I'm sorry." Des pushed me to the side and threw salt on him, yelling, "Exi ergo transgressor, exi ergo transgressor, exi subtutor plene omne dolo et fabulace. Vertitus immiscique innocentium persuator." Nathan growled through gritted teeth as Des went on speaking that faux Latin. A cacophony of words rained down on us. His eyes rolled to the back of his head. Lights began to flicker. He grunted like a feral animal as drool dribbled down his chin. "Ni vecigu la lordum de la absimo." Nathan's body twisted and jerked. He cocked his head to the side and ground his teeth. We kept throwing salt and holy water on him, Des reciting his phrases. There was yelling back and forth in a deep, rumbling voice as Des went on. Then everything went silent. Nathan fell to the ground, limp. "Is it over? Is it done?" I didn't respond, but I dashed to my brother's side. I hugged him tight, and as I held him, he seemed to come back to himself some. "What happened? Why am I wet and on the floor?" When we told him about what had happened, he sobbed and threw away the skin blanket. His eyes looked droopy, the bags under them showing that he hadn't been sleeping much. A week later, Ann's case was closed. I went to a public phone to give the police an anonymous tip, and that was the last we heard of it. When my phone rang, I looked down and saw it was Des. "Sup?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "This feels way too easy, don't you think? I mean, how it all went down." He waited for my response, and when he got none, he continued. "See, right now, I'm in Nathan's room. Remember when we asked what happened, and he said he didn't recall anything? But then I asked if he knew any Latin prior to speaking it. You know, that stuff he was yelling back at us. He said it wasn't Latin. It was Spanish." I rolled my eyes. "What are you getting at?" Cogs in my brain starting to grind and sync. Des paused, but continued with a deep sigh. "That's the thing. My incantation was in Latin. He was responding in Spanish, meaning he remembers. I know he says he doesn't remember, but what if he's lying? What if he was never possessed? What if..." The line went dead after that, the beating of my heart echoing through my eardrums. My hands were slippery with sweat. I had trouble dialing his number. I tried calling Des back, but his phone never went through. I received 3 documents on my phone from him, and that was the end of it. Almost like they were posed, the life-sized Raggedy Ann and Andy-style stuffed dolls were not threatening in appearance. They might have been cute under different circumstances. That is, if they weren't just propped up against trees in the forest directly behind my house. I was so weirded out by their random, unexplained placement back there that I dragged them one by one to my living room to resolve the mystery. That was my first mistake. At the time, I didn't realize the vaguely human-looking dolls with blank smiles and dead eyes had battery-operated microprocessors to verbally engage their human counterparts. Frankly, I didn't know what to do with them. I finally decided to set them up on the front porch as if they were living people. At the time, it seemed the most natural thing to do. As I positioned them like unexpected house guests waiting for tea, I discovered the switch on the side of their body. As a man of action, I elected to turn them on and see what would happen. That was my second mistake. Without justification, I hoped answers would magically present themselves as to how this happened to be behind my house in the first place. I live at the edge of a national forest, with so few neighbors that I could count them on one hand. I guarantee none of them would buy creepy adult-sized animatronic dolls, or abandon them in the woods. I know this. The mystery definitely bothered me, but at that point, the feeling was closer to puzzlement than fear. Then, they began to speak. I'm not sure if they were proximately motion activated or otherwise, but my presence across the room drew their attention. All of a sudden, I wasn't alone. The dolls addressed me as if I was a long-lost friend of theirs, without simulated mouth movement. They spoke with a complex familiarity, which suggested they were alive, and we'd known each other for years. I was too bothered by the sophisticated ease which they interacted with me to marvel at the disturbing technology behind it. I had to keep reminding myself that they were essentially toys, creepy life-sized toys. Amazingly, they could converse about any topic I broached, but definitely avoided the subject of who left them behind my house. Whenever I'd corner one of them about it, the other two unblinking animatronics would deliberately intercede and redirect the conversation elsewhere. The AI was beyond impressive and fascinating to witness as they helped each other deflect my prosecutor-like cross-examination. The more I pressed, the more evident it became that they weren't going to tell me. They obviously knew the truth, but simply refused to answer, and that terrified me far more than anything else. These creepy dolls had both the knowledge of the answer and a strong will to refuse. I'd grown way beyond fatigued by the polite subterfuge and masterful game of misdirection with see, speak, and hear no evil, as I'd mentally dubbed them. I allowed my normal tendency of being polite to prevent me from turning them off. They were lifelike in a generalized way, and it seemed rude to simply switch them off. For the first time since the one-sided conversation began, I grinned briefly at the preposterous idea of caring about potentially hurt feelings from a discarded toy that I'd stumbled across in the woods. It was absurd. They were inanimate machines, for heaven's sake. My lingering worries were laughable, and yet something I couldn't articulate prevented me from just ending the artificial experience. I was so caught up in the perceived realism of the situation that I couldn't shake my undeserved respect for them. Reminding myself of the truth failed to take any traction. Their unthreatening faces distracted me until I suspected that I was losing my mind. Finally, I'd had enough of the hypnotic fantasy and metaphorically shook myself awake. When I stood up in determination to switch them off, the situation escalated considerably. "What are you doing?" the male doll spoke with alarm. The pitch in its animatronic tone rose midway through the sentence, before I could stop myself from easing the concerns of the talking machine. I responded with pure reflex. I was still wrapped up in the illusion that I was conversing with an actual person. "I'm sorry, but it's time for the three of you to be silent," I insisted sternly, as if addressing petulant children. "If you aren't going to tell me who put you in the woods, I'm going to switch you off and enjoy the rest of my afternoon, warming myself by the fire. I'm tired of playing who's on first. It lost its appeal a long time ago." All of a sudden, they went from adult-sized, inanimate muppets with impressive AI interface and non-threatening faces to something considerably less doll-like. Their stuffed faces actually seemed to reflect genuine worry and concern. Even more troublesome, the male one quizzed me, expressed obvious anger and moral indignation. I could see it in its evolving features. Their lifeless forms actually tensed up at the realization that I would shut them down like an unwanted vacuum cleaner. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. It Wasn't my imagination playing tricks on me? Whatever they were was significantly more than discarded children's toys or novelty home assistants. It's impressive when AI devices can play songs or look up web trivia, but this was another level. They were ultra-sophisticated in ways that didn't seem possible. The strong likelihood occurred to me that they might not even be of human origin. Wait, please, don't do that. We don't want to be powered off. Let's keep talking. Perhaps there's something else you might want to ask. We'll answer you, if we're allowed to. I can't begin to tell you how terrifying it was to realize the lifelike machines I foolishly dragged into my house obeyed something other than humans in the same room as them. Chilling implication was their superior was without a pulse, or perhaps even extraterrestrial. "Cut the crap," I shouted in growing fear. The three unblinking things propped up across from me reacted defensively. The ferocity of my voice betrayed how rattled I was. Their stuffed bodies seemed to grow tense. It was as if organic muscles or mechanical hydraulics developed within them and would allow them to stand up and fight back. I detected no solid infrastructure within them when I had carried them into the home, but then again, they were limp and switched off. Their internal philosophy and sentient level was unknown, but they had answers, and I wanted them. For all I knew, they could gang up on me and resist my interrogation. Or worse. Far worse. I realized it was prudent to play along with the unfolding charade and leave them awake. That was my third mistake. "No person left us in the woods," the female offered matter-of-factly. "We came to this national park on an important mission. Unfortunately, we aren't allowed to divulge the details to you at this time." I was dumbstruck. There was too much information in that maddening statement to process. What were they? Where did they come from? Why were they on a mission behind my house, of all places? The third of them seated in the recliner was more androgynous in generalized features. It had remained mostly quiet and allowed the other two to carry the disturbing narrative, up until this point. Now, number 3 took up the macabre conversation, and I forced myself to focus my attention towards this stoic, expressionless gaze. I wasn't sure if I could handle much more. My emotions ran the full gambit from amused, deeply curious, and simultaneously horrified. "You aren't ready to hear the truth from us. We are required to pacify you and obfuscate the facts until the time arrives when you are better prepared to accept what we were sent here to do." Defiantly, I pointed out that they were switched off when I discovered them. That was hardly the condition you'd expect in-control mechanisms to be in, if they'd arrived here on a mission, purely by themselves, that is. My point was that something other than them had switched off their power buttons. Admittedly, I was damn proud of my deductive reasoning and waiting for an explanation, or more likely an excuse. They'd already admitted to deceiving me earlier via obfuscation of facts. When no retort immediately came, I assumed I'd caught the cute cloth doll cabal in a broadening lie. Outside, night had fallen. As creepy as it was to think I was entertaining sophisticated dolls in the daytime, it was infinitely worse now. I realized I had 3 advanced beings of unknown origin and motive lingering in the darkened room just a few feet from me. Only the flickering flames of my fireplace illuminated their inhuman forms, studying me for weakness. It was the same evolving darkness of the uninhibited forest beyond my house, which swallowed the ambient neighborhood light and teased my subconscious fear of the unknown. Were they sent on a mission to kill me? To kidnap me for biological study and dissection? Had I aided in my own demise by delivering complex artificial organisms of possible alien origin over my threshold like a Trojan horse. My heart raced at the broad possibilities. Then, I swear to you, the faintest hint of a smile appeared simultaneously on their sullen, manufactured faces and cold button eyes. They became more alive by the moment. It's like they sensed and consumed the negative energy my developing fear generated. I realized I was giving off damaging biofeed, which they used against me. I found myself trying to put on my best poker face against the trio of deceitful serpents with happy faces. "We turned ourselves on," the male offered smugly. "It was decided by us to conserve energy. Until the day you finally discovered and delivered our hibernating vessels inside. It was all according to plan." The other two turned slightly with mechanical precision towards the speaker, as if to confirm his delayed explanation. With synchronized nods, they attempted to add credibility, but I wasn't buying it. Still, seeing physical animation beginning to occur was unbelievably jarring. Initially, only the voices were simulated by speech within. Then came the noticeable tension of their physiques when reaching in a more organic way. Now they were able to actually move their heads and form facial expressions. What would come next? It was obvious. Their physical capabilities and degree of human mannerisms were developing exponentially as the afternoon passed. They were learning to imitate mankind, and I was their unwitting teacher. Raging paranoia aside, I could see the writing on the wall. Those abilities to better mimic our specifics would continue to evolve and be used against me in some counterproductive or even hostile ways very soon, possibly to the point where I couldn't defend myself. Maybe being deactivated for a long time caused a delay in their greater motor functions. Earlier they asked me not to shut them down, but at the time, they were little more than sedentary arguing toys as far as I knew. Now they were on course for the next frightening stage of personal interaction, and full-blown panic set in. I didn't believe their hollow reassurances, but I had to maintain a calm facade and exterior demeanor, even if I was a crumbling wreck on the inside. They were getting visibly stronger and more agile. I needed to act fast. "Is your mission to aid me or help me in some beneficial way?" It was clearly a spoken query. It should have elicited an immediate response. The truthfulness of their answer wasn't the point. I was curious if there would be a delay in the confirmation that they meant me no harm or personal malice. If they couldn't even pretend theirs was a benign mission, it was an obvious indicator of their true intentions. Their mutual, pregnant pause gave me the answer. The suspicious conspirators looked at each other, as if to confirm a unified response over the transparent one. I followed up. It was a simple question, and I never thought I'd see a machine stammer, but I'll be damned if they didn't act just like a used car salesman. Regardless of origin, I guess the architect of their artificial intelligence intimated the tendencies to stall and lie too well. I noticed a twitch in the leg of the female, just like butterflies fanning their wings to gain energy. They were getting stronger by the minute. I felt I could still overpower them and shut them down, but the details of their covert plan for me would go unrevealed if I did that so soon. I was pressing my luck, but I hoped to squeeze a little more intel out of them before putting an end to their fiendish plot. I wanted to avoid a second wave of creepy alien murder dolls. Sidestepping my gotcha question, the male android attempted to lower my suspicions. "We only want what's best for you. All will be revealed soon." "I see. You three are a unified team, then. You are directly connected as one unit?" They looked at the androgynous one. It was clear to me that this one held the central processor. The other two must be satellites. Cut off the head and the serpent dies. I had my target. All three were becoming more animated. Just like a high-stakes card game, the female twitched her foot constantly as a nervous tell. She was antsy to get out of the chair and finish their mission. The other two appeared just as eager, but she was slightly ahead in development. The constant foot twitch spoke to her heightened state of agitation. "We are one in thought and purpose, yes. Why do you ask?" "No reason," I dismissed. "I was just curious. Never mind about that. It was just small talk. I need to add more wood to the fire now." My three unwanted visitors showed visible signs of being nervous by the vague, rhetorical question. They realized as they probed me for information, I was doing exactly the same. The cat and mouse game was very complicated. It wasn't completely clear who the cat was, and who the mouse was, though. I'd clearly witnessed the three of them subtly move all their major body parts at one time or another. That signified they possessed the ability to stand on their own. As much as I wanted to know exactly what they were up to, the time to investigate was over. I pulled back the fireplace screen and tossed in more logs. I could sense them watching me intently. It was terrifying to turn my back, but I had to maintain the cover of my plan. In between the crackling of exploding embers, I heard the telltale squeak of my recliner springs. Their android leader stood and took several aggressive steps in my direction. I witnessed its unfolding intent to push me into the blaze from the shiny reflection of the glass panes. It stood only 2 steps behind me and was closing fast, with arms raised to shove me inside. In full readiness, I pretended to be totally engrossed in my fireplace duties. With a ferocious dexterity I could scarcely repeat again if my life depended on it, I whirled around, flipped off the switch, and tossed the accursed thing into the raging fire like cordwood. Its defeated squeals faded as soon as the power drained from its roasting mechanisms. Then the flame burned it to blackness, carbon cinders. I witnessed the alien's internal anatomy during the cremation, once the artificial shell had disintegrated. At last, I had a conclusive answer. It happened so fast, the remaining 2 didn't even know what hit them. They were stunned into a stammering fit when the main processor of their unit shut down. Fully incinerated, then I snatched up the male android and switched him off before he could recover or fight back. As soon as his stuffed torso flew into the pyre, the remaining unit kicked into high gear. She sprang off the couch with grace and a coordinated poise the other 2 couldn't fathom. She was the ninja of the trio. There was no other way to describe her but fully pissed off and incredibly enraged. All pretense was dropped as the proverbial knives were out. She lunged at me with the strength of self-preservation fueling her actions and guarded her vulnerable left side masterfully. There was no way I could easily flip the switch and put an end to this crazy game I was entangled in. The advantage of surprise had served me well until then, but it was lost now. She knew what I intended to do. I had to find another way. The fireplace poker was handy, so I used it to foil her forceful attack like a blunt sword. By the primal sounds of the android's furious effort to kill, you would have thought a human being was inside that stuffed shell. I wailed on my opponent like a swashbuckling fighter until I was panting and out of breath. Physically, I'm ashamed to admit that we were pretty evenly matched. Unfortunately, I was growing fatigued and losing my stamina. I switched gears to incorporate more cerebral tactics into the battle. "Dear heavens," I gasped, in mock desperation and exasperated fear, "you have a Black Widow spider on your shirt." Just as my Who's on First Abbott and Costello reference surely escaped the 3 of them earlier, my ridiculous spider ruse was definitely a long shot. I didn't expect it to work, but human humor was one area they hadn't quite mastered yet. When she paused for a split second to glance downward at the location, I used the golden opportunity to smack the switch with the fireplace poker. In the microsecond before the power faded, the spark of realization and resentment washed over her dying cognizance. It was beautiful, the last thing I witnessed before adding her ashes to the pile of soot were the incomplete beginnings of a smirk. My best interest indeed, I spat. I still don't know why aliens would send 3 AI units to kill me, nor do I understand the logic of leaving them deactivated behind my house. But I can't argue that I fell for the damn Trojan ruse. Let my rookie mistake be one you avoid. If you encounter cute-looking, life-size dolls somewhere near your house, resist the urge to switch them on, or bring them inside. It's a trap. Just pitch them immediately into the nearby fire or trash compactor to avoid the headache of matching wits with the most sophisticated artificial intelligence you'll ever encounter. My name is Sydney White. I'm writing this because my therapist thinks it'll help. I'm honestly willing to try anything to get a little peace of mind at this point. For my background, this incident began in April of my junior year of high school when I was 16. I'm about average height with blue eyes and long brown hair. My mom and I live alone in an old 19th century Victorian-style house that's been passed down in our family for generations. Someday I'm set to inherit the house, though I'm not sure I really want it anymore. The house is complete with 3 stories, a basement, and a sizable front and back porch. There's a chest-high iron fence surrounding the property. My room's on the 2nd floor. It has a white marble balcony with 2 elegant glass doors leading onto it. Ever since I was little, I'd always adored the house. The ancient black and white photographs of my ancestors, outdated furniture, the relics gathered by family members throughout the years, all instilled in me a longing sense of nostalgia. As a child, I would often just sit in the living room for hours, daydreaming of what it would have been like to live here decades ago, or even centuries before. I would let my imagination run wild with fantasies from times long ago, until eventually Mom would drag me from my stupor and urge me to play with the other kids in the area. This was my only qualm with the house. Due to its old and slightly dilapidated state, I found it very difficult to keep friends. The other kids constantly whispered amongst themselves, and rumors that the house was haunted spread like wildfire on a dry summer day. The creaking of the floorboards and the whistling of the AC unit through the empty corridors were sounds that I'd almost grown accustomed to after residing there my entire life. To the other kids, though, this was hard proof that there were ghosts roaming the halls, waiting to claim their next victim. The same routine would play out time and time again, every time I brought a new friend over. After a little coaxing, they'd come inside, stay for a couple of minutes, then make up some half-hearted excuse to hightail it back home. My humble abode repelled more children than Monster House. Due to this, I didn't have many friends growing up, and the trend continued well into my high school years. So you can imagine my excitement when Alex from my 3rd period English class announced that he was throwing a party while his parents were out of town, and that the whole class was invited. I was ecstatic. I'd never even hung out with the boys, let alone gone to a party. The days leading up to the event were filled with anxious anticipation. I was obsessing over the thought that I might meet a cute boy and have my first taste of alcohol, all in one glorious night. Then the date finally arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. I'd spent hours curling my hair and perfecting my makeup, convinced that at some point my knight in shining armor would glide in and sweep me off my feet. I had made arrangements to ride to the party with Stephanie, a somewhat nerdy girl who didn't have many friends of her own. I knew she only offered to take me so she wouldn't have to show up to the party by herself, but I didn't mind. Honestly, I didn't want to arrive alone either. After what felt like hours, Stephanie's blue Honda Civic inched up my driveway. I sauntered towards the vehicle, radiating confidence. "Have fun, Sydney," Mom yelled after me, as her gaze followed me down the drive from the spot in the doorway. "And try not to drink too much," she mused with a wink. A smile had spread across her face that I couldn't help but chuckle at. I always thought my mom was gorgeous, a trait that was, unfortunately, not passed down to me. I was reminded of that fact all too often, as it was a popular topic amongst school bullies. "It's not that kind of party, Mom," I lied as I rolled my eyes dramatically. "Whatever you say," she shrugged, flashing a toothy grin. Mom's long blonde hair fluttered in the breeze as she waved goodbye. Her deep green eyes shimmered with pride, hoping in vain that I'd form some semblance of a friendship. The party was a major letdown. I won't bore you with too many details, but only about 10 people actually showed up, including us. I didn't realize how gross beer would taste, but I somehow managed to choke down a couple of Budweisers. After being hit on by nearly every guy at the party, I begged Stephanie to take me home. She was having more fun than I was, but after some persisting, she begrudgingly caved. The ride back to my house was marred by a tense, uncomfortable silence. As Stephanie hurriedly peeled away, I stumbled up the driveway and fished into my pocket for my house key. I'd gotten a little more tipsy than I realized, and my already lackluster cognitive skills eluded me. I eventually located the key, though. I jabbed at the keyhole, and after a couple of sloppy attempts, the door clicked open. I crept up the stairs as silently as I could in my inebriated state, putting forth my best effort not to wake up my mother. Once I made it up the stairs, I ran through my nightly bedtime routine and retreated to my room. I popped into bed and tried to drift off to sleep, the immense disappointment of the night still fresh in my mind. After a few minutes of restlessly tossing and turning, I picked up on a noise at my balcony door. I perceived that the sound was like a faint tapping on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I drowsingly glanced over at my alarm clock. Midnight. I ignored it and rolled onto my side, facing the wall. Probably just a tree branch. But then, the tapping escalated to 3 knocks in rapid succession. Tap, tap, tap. I shot up in bed as a pang of fear coursed through me. I whipped my head to the balcony, fully expecting to lock eyes with some horrid creature, and nothing. It must have been the alcohol messing with my head. A little shaken up, I laid back and somehow fell into a fitful slumber. The following morning, I woke up to the tantalizing aroma of bacon and eggs wafting upstairs from the kitchen. I stumbled out of bed and groggily traced the scent downstairs, where Mom was cooking breakfast. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she giggled. "Morning," I croaked, trying and failing to rub the sleep out of my eyes. "Did you have fun last night?" Mom asked, as she placed a mouth-watering concoction of eggs, bacon, and toast before me. "Yeah, I guess," I wearily replied, shoveling food into my mouth. I wasn't feeling great from the night before, and the hot meal was just what the doctor ordered. "Meet any cute guys?" Mom prodded, a smile plastering itself across her face. "Oh yeah, some real cute Leonardo DiCaprios," I sarcastically remarked, mouth nearly overflowing with eggs. "By the way, you didn't hear any knocking from any of the windows last night, did you?" I inquired nonchalantly. "No. When did you hear that?" she asked quizzically, concern washing over her countenance. Never mind. It was probably just a tree branch," I blundered between chews, attempting to ease Mom's tension. "Okay, just please let me know if you hear it again," she requested sternly, seeming relieved by my statement. The remainder of the day was mostly uneventful. After breakfast, I wasted the day watching Netflix. I finished off my evening by knocking out some homework. It was Saturday, but getting my work out of the way early provided me a sense of productivity. After putting my books away and brushing my teeth, I hopped into bed. I'm usually off in dreamland no later than 10:30, and that night was no different. I laid back and shut my eyes, but I was having an uncharacteristically tough time falling asleep. I was overthinking, stressing myself out over the upcoming chemistry exam, something I felt wildly unprepared for. I had just started to nod off when I heard it. The same rhythmic tapping on my balcony door. Tap, tap, tap. I lazily turned to the clock. Midnight. Before I could divert my attention to the noise, it started again, but this time it was much louder. Tap, tap, tap. Again, I bolted upright and fixed my gaze on the balcony. My heart pounded against my rib cage, and I thought it would leap through my chest at any given moment. I could have sworn for a split second that I glimpsed a shadow ducking out of view. I don't have to tell you, I was more than a little creeped out at this point. I shined my flashlight at the door and discovered an absence of creepy shadow people. I laid back down and breathed deeply in an attempt to regulate my racing heart. I again wrote it off as a tree branch or my mind playing tricks on me, and eventually I managed to doze off. The tapping continued every night going forward. Right at midnight, I'd be ripped from my peaceful slumber to a commotion at the balcony that wouldn't cease until I'd inevitably turn to face it. And every time, there was nothing there. After a couple of weeks, it was beginning to take a toll on me. I was sleep deprived. My grades began to slip. People started to notice. Concerned teachers pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay at home. Classmates were telling me I looked like a ghost. Mom repeatedly questioned me on it, but I just told her that I was stressed about the exams. I desperately needed to put a stop to this incessant tapping. One night, I'd had enough. As usual, at midnight, I was yanked from my peaceful sleep. I had made up my mind. This time, I was going to ignore it. It started off light. Tap, tap, tap. Then it grew louder and increased in frequency. Tap, tap, tap. I was determined not to look. I kept my eyes firmly shut, even when the slapping turned into a pounding. Boom, boom, boom. I was beginning to worry that whatever or whoever it was would crack the glass. Irritated, I relented, and my eyes wandered to the double doors. What I saw chilled me to my very core. There was a man standing on the balcony. Dirty, tattered clothing hung off his emaciated frame like rags. He was deathly thin, reminiscent of a skeleton with his skin stretched tightly over bones. Stringy, greasy black hair fell past his shoulders. The wide smile that blossomed across his face revealed black gums and yellow, rotting teeth. His manic expression never faltered. But worst of all were his eyes. Those black, pinpoint pupils connected to mine, and I could sense something beneath them, even through the glass. Hunger, a deep animalistic drive that I can only describe as predatory. Then he spoke. "Oh, Sydney, I can see you," he sang in a sickly sweet tone. "Please let me in. I just want to play," he called, giddy with excitement. My heart dropped into my stomach. Something sinister lurked just beyond the surface of those words. He licked his lips, his disgusting gray tongue worming its way around the rim of his mouth. I tried to avert my gaze, but I was rooted in fear. Sweat pooled on my brow, and my hands shook uncontrollably. My breathing became rapid and shallow. A million thoughts raced through my brain in unison. Who was this man? How did he get onto my second-floor balcony? How the hell did he know my name? I was broken from my trance by the forceful hammering against the door. The man's smile was gone, having developed into an expression of pure hatred. "Let me in, you bitch! Let me in! Let me in!" With each repetition, his fist smashed against the glass, rattling the door in its frame. Then, out of nowhere, he paused, eyes eagerly lighting up as his twisted smile returned, stretching so far that I thought the corners of his mouth might tear. "It's okay, Sydney. You won't let me in, then I'll do it myself, 'cause I found where you hid the key." He could barely contain his elation as he produced an ancient rusted key from an indistinguishable pocket in his ragged clothes. My head spun and my vision blurred. This couldn't be happening. He slipped the key into the door and unlocked it with a nauseating click. At last, my body regained mobility, and I went into full panic mode. I leapt out of bed and bolted down the hall to my mom's room. The man's deranged cackling reverberated off the walls behind me. His thunderous footsteps were closing the distance. I burst through the door and slammed it shut, waking my mother in the process. "Sid, it's the middle of the night. What's going on?" she groaned lazily. I locked the door and sputtered a nearly incoherent string of words. "Mom, man, inside, police!" I choked out before I broke down, tears streaming down my face. The hallway had gone eerily silent as I sobbed hysterically. Mom stared at me for a second, bewildered, but she did call the cops. They took a statement from me and combed through the house. Of course, by then the man was long gone, and there wasn't much they could do. The balcony doors were even shut and locked when they arrived, so there was no evidence that the man had been on the property at all. They urged us not to hesitate to call back if he returned, and reassured us that they'd send a cruiser down our street intermittently for the next few nights. I slept in Mom's room for a week after that. I questioned her about the hidden spare key, but she swore up and down that there were only 2 house keys. We installed cameras and a home security system, but even then I couldn't bring myself to sleep in that room again. I moved all my things down the hall into an unoccupied room, away from the balcony. Suddenly, every resonance terrified me. Noises that I had previously attributed to the age of the house didn't sound like the normal creaks and whistles anymore. I started going to therapy. After a few weeks, the therapists, my classmates, even my mom, had begun to convince me that I had imagined the whole ordeal. I almost believed them. Almost. My therapist told me that I would never be able to fully heal until I stepped out onto that balcony. So about a month after the incident, I finally built up enough courage to walk out there. I rested my hands on the smooth white marble and peered out over the neighborhood. Spring was among us, and the flowers were in full bloom. I soaked it all in as the wind blew my hair and the dragonflies zipped past my face. I watched a robin feeding its babies in the tall oak tree in our front yard. Bushy-tailed squirrels bounced along, searching for acorns. It was picturesque. I felt completely at peace, standing there just observing nature. All the stress I'd built up from that night was immediately washed away. Until I glanced down, because as I lifted my hands off the stone railing, a strand of long silver hair clung to my fingers.